Hi, I'm Laura McHarrie at The Hidden Age.
And I'm Nigel Davey from SME Needs, and this is one of our 10-minute podcasts. Today we are talking to John Bennett, a guide from schoolofthought.life, talking about how best we keep in touch with our teams now that we're working remotely due to lockdown.
John, hi. We met just about 12 months ago at a young enterprise employability skills session. At the time, you were figuring out how to create a niche for yourself as a newly launched freelancer. Tell us about you and schoolofthought.life and why you are well positioned to offer some insights for our audience today.
Thank you, Laura, and hello all. Yes, young enterprise, something I'm very deeply passionate about. Having been previously a business owner and running my own recruitment business for 20 years, it's fantastic to be able to share my knowledge and my understanding of what business requires with the younger generation. Let me explain a little bit more about me and the reason why I set up schoolofthought.life. Having set up my financial services recruitment business based in London, we had many challenging times over the period of the 15 years, not least September 11th and also the credit crisis in 2008. But in all that time, we managed to keep the business going, and I learned an awful lot about myself and also how I could do things differently and or better. In 2013, we moved from London to Dorset, where we bought a mill house, and where there's mill, there is usually water. However, shortly after moving in, we were flooded. Then we had to have all hands to the pump to get the house back to a habitable place. This obviously was costly both in time and in money, and resulted in me having a very, very challenging time. And in 2015, I fell into depression. But I'm a big believer in the fact that you need adversity to find success. And from my depression, I believe my greatest success is going to become alive. In 2017, I cycled around Iceland. I completed my first 100-mile run, and I completed the Wanner, which is an 82 miles coastal run in Dorset, thereby finding that the real therapy is in the outdoor environment. Having managed to find my headspace, I looked to build a career in Dorset, where I undertook a HR qualification and I completed my CIPD level 5, thinking I'd go into an HR role. However, the first role that I took, I realised the fact it's all very much employee relations-based issues, and that's not something that's me. I was much more around the whys, the whats, the wheres, what makes people tick, the motivation that sits behind people. And it's with that in mind that I ended up looking around for coaching courses that I could then hone some of my skills, and I found a transformational coaching course. I believe that everybody needs time and space to explore what's going on with them at that point, at that time. And with that in mind, people need to be able to go and explore themselves in the great outdoors, walking and talking. That is schoolofthought.life. It is using coaching methodology, but in the outdoor environment.
John, thanks for sharing your background. At the moment, there are many who are working in difficult circumstances, either alone or perhaps distracted by kids, schoolwork, and partners, each tapping into the broadband connection. How do you recommend managers keep in contact with remote teams?
Well, I think there's a number of things that managers need to bear in mind, and it's not least around the internet connection, but there's many other things around the fact that remote working can be challenging for some people, but some companies will have already obviously set up flexible working and remote working. All they would have had to do was actually just scale it up, and that would be a lot of pressure for the IT team probably to spring into action and get that going. But for other companies that haven't set themselves up within there, what they're going to find is the fact that communication is the most critical aspect of it all. And when I say communication, that's not just specifically around just talking. We do an awful lot of communication outside of talking, with the facial expressions, with body language, with just a little bit of assistance that sits within the office environment. Moving from a work environment where you go to work, where you socialise with your colleagues, your friends, to then being remotely working where you're isolated. You might well have children, but what you don't have is you don't have all those little incidences, little moments with colleagues. That's part and parcel of your normal working life. Being able to have a little natter, overhearing a conversation, being able to support somebody, going for a coffee, going for a walk and a talk and everything else like that. Businesses need to bear that in mind. So if you just make it singularly based purely around factual business related stuff, you're losing the social aspect, which is critical to building a team. I sort of canvassed a number of my clients, and I sort of asked them to get a bit of an idea as to what they're instilling. Pretty much every single one of them turned around and said it is utmost critical that they have non-work chats. Some of them setting them up first thing in the morning, where you just have a half-hour conversation about what's going on. Others are doing it after lunch, and so on and so forth. People have to be able to share what's going on with them at that time. Managers need to be more understanding of the fact that they don't know what's going on in that person's family situation and or the environment they're having to work as well. So really listening, actively listening. I think you need to be more mindful of your employees at this particular time. An empathetic nature is going to be critical to maintaining that relationship. As I mentioned, I used to own my own recruitment company, and recruitment was one of those jobs that could be done on the go, and invariably it typically was. You know, we'd be running from one meeting to the next meeting, utilising our phones, but having online group meetings based off our phones and or our laptops if we could find some quiet place in a coffee shop. And many people are actually doing it at the moment. What they're doing is they're using House Party or Zoom, where you just get everybody together on the screen, pick a Friday afternoon, 4:00. Just decompress, take away all the work-related conversation that sits within it. And I always found that was one of the greatest ways to actually just share some of the frustrations, but also to leave a positive feeling going into the weekend.
John, it's not only the team members that will be under extreme stress right now. I had 2 harrowing board meetings recently to discuss continuity plans. How much do you think the directors should care and share?
Very interesting question. There's an awful lot of pressure that sits on the directors, and they have doubly stressful moments at this particular time. The responsibility for their staff, the business, how they're going to pay them, how they're going to manage the business carrying on is very, very challenging. I'm a big believer in open communication. I think the reason why I managed to move myself away from my depression to where I am currently now is the fact that I communicate. I know it doesn't sometimes come naturally, and I know sometimes directors and owners have to try to keep things close to their chest. Obviously, keep professional stuff close to your chest, but share how you're feeling, because that will enable your staff to share how they're feeling. And effectively, then you get a consensus of we're all in it, and we're all in it together. And that, I think, is critical. Often businesses will not want to show their vulnerability, but I personally believe vulnerability is a strength. There's a really, I love TED Talks, and there's a really interesting one from Brené Brown, who's a professor, a lecturer, and an author around vulnerability. I highly recommend that anybody, to be honest, but certainly business owners and directors should listen to it. But I think from a health point of view, you need to take a step away from work. As I've earlier mentioned, I'm a big believer in the great outdoors. Look at nature. Realise the fact that, yes, we have problems that we're currently facing, so on and so forth, but outdoors gives you a different perspective, and it might actually give you a different line of thought.
John, in many businesses, there will be some that get furloughed, who may or may not lose their jobs, and then others that are working from home, isolated from team members and potentially suffering sort of survivor syndrome. What do you suggest at that point?
Well, I think there's going to be massive changes off the back of this, and there's going to be an awful lot of different stresses placed on people. The people that come back might be fearful of the fact that they might be overworked because they've got to try and make up for lost revenue, lost time. They might have missing some of their friends and colleagues, and people's mental health is going to be very challenged. Whether they're part of the survivor syndrome, they feel guilty even that they kept their job. But I also think that there's going to be a fear of the future, because when you go back to work, you don't know how stable that business might or might not be. So you could be living with anxiety when you go back into work, which therefore could actually also have a knock-on effect about your motivation and productivity as well. So, like I said earlier, sharing their concerns, sharing their thoughts, Perhaps they might well have a mental health champion that they can utilise as well. And I think people are going to be looking for support when they get back into work. And again, similarly, look to maybe seek external help.
Do you know what? There was some great suggestions there. Thanks, John. It would be really great if our listeners can make contact with you if needs be. How might they do that?
Yes, well, probably best is to either drop me an email to john@schoolofthought.life, or just look on my webpage at schoolofthought.life.
Okay, so that's me, Nigel Davey from SME Needs.
And me, Laura McHarrie at The Hidden Edge. Please do make contact with any of us for sound business advice whenever you feel you need it. Oh, please, and don't forget to comment on, like, follow, and share this podcast.